Right, morning. Welcome to Boston Bow Spine Tester video. So these are really simple. They're for testing the spine of Warbow arrows, and I make these to go to about £75. Anything less than that, you would probably want to look at a slightly different method for doing this, but this is really aimed at warbows. So these will spine arrows really accurately from 75 to the numbers I've got go up to 172. You don't need to go beyond 172 spine. So this video isn't going to be about the actual spine of Warbow arrows. This is going to be about how to make this particular device to test that spine. So it's really simple. It uses two brass hooks like this one. You can get these from any hardware store, and for reference that hook is 2 inches long. So there's two hooks, they're bedded in, and I'm going to explain that in a second. And then there's this EOTech digital depth gauge. I'll put a link to this on the website. Make sure you get a digital one, don't buy an analog one, and make sure you get one which has a removable back piece and has this plate here with a little hole in it, so you can screw into a back of a piece of wood. So it's the dial, it's two hooks, and then it's a piece of wood. The piece of wood has to be flat, and it has to be more than 26 inches long, because those two brass hooks will be put in at 26 inches apart. So you've got to have maybe a quarter inch more than that. You could do this, and then in terms of this piece of wood is at least 26 long, and it only needs to be about 3.5 inches thick. It's really simple. You just bed the hooks in at an exactly 26-inch point, and then you mount your dial at 13 inches, which is obviously halfway. So you're measuring the middle deflection of the arrow. Now, the only bit you need to be really very kind of wary of and getting this right is that where the dial mounts, it's going to be set away from the wood, and in this case it's 13 mil away. So these hooks at their radius, I guess, at their lowest point, has to be 13 mil away from the wood. So if I was to hold, it's going to be very difficult on camera, but if you were to put that up there, the lowest point of that hook is 13 mil away from the wood. The reason it's like that is so when you put an arrow on, it lines up lovely. So if you look at that shaft is on there. The shaft is nice and straight anyway, but that dial is touching the wood, and it's in its pinch now between those two hooks. So that's it. So 26 inches apart, 13 inches, so the middle point where you put the dial. The dial in my design here stands 13 mil away from the wood. You obviously don't want it too flat to the wood, you don't want the shaft fouling. And so you make sure you bed the hooks in, and so the lowest point of that hook is also 13 mil away from the wood. Okay, so that's nice and simple. Now obviously when you're using this, you're going to have it stood up, and so you can actually look at the dial. It won't work obviously if gravity isn't helping you. And then if I just show you how this would work, so you turn it on, currently zeroed. Now what you'll notice is as I pull the shaft away, the dial reads a number. That deflection correlates to the spine. So let's say the deflection is, let's do a really simple one, 0.2. So that would be 0.2, which is a tiny amount. I can barely even hold that. There we go. Make sure it's set to inches. So yeah, 0.2. So I'm pushing it down, and I'm climbing to, that's 0.2. So that's not a massive deflection. That relates to 130 pound spine. Now the only other bit you have to be really conscious of when you make these is that there's a calibrated weight. So obviously if it's a calibrated weight and you measure the shafts, they're all going to be coming out the same. Now this looks an absolute bodge, but this is an exact 2 pound weight. Now obviously gravity can't help me, but that hooks on here, and then that 2 pound weight is going to pull down on the shaft. You're going to read the deflection, and the deflection is going to relate to the spine. Super simple. So in terms of making it, that's all you need to do. block of wood which is over 26 inches, go for like 28 inches long, go for 3.5 inches deep, so you've got enough to get the needle travel. If it helps, the hooks are mounted 2.5 inches down. If you buy the exact same dial as me, mount the hooks 2.5 inches down, make sure they're perfectly 26 inches and also perfectly in line with this dial. And then obviously when you use this, you have to make sure that the travel of the dial is always enough to go low. So don't mount the hooks at the end of that travel. You want to, as you put the arrow shaft in, have to push the dial up and then 0. And then when you use it, the travel allows you to measure downward deflection. Okay, obviously it can't work when it's laid on a table, but it was difficult to film otherwise. But that's it. That is the entire thing to make a spine tester. You could get a bit of wood from B&Q for a couple of quid. These hooks are a couple of quid. That dial cost me 16 and it was free delivery. So you can get the entire thing if you've got a bit of wood hanging around for 20 quid easily. This table I'll put on the website, that's really straightforward. It shows you deflection in inches. So £75 spine, and it goes in 2.5 increments. So you can get really accurate measurements. So yeah, just to recap, go for a digital one. It's measured in inches. Most of these measurements are in inches. Make sure the hooks relate to, so make sure the arrow will stay on the hooks in level with where that dial wants to be. What you don't want is for the hook to be off level, and so as you use it, the dial falls across like that. And then obviously, this isn't a video about how you use this particular tool, it's just how to make one. They're really simple to make, but just keep an eye on where that dial is, because if it moves around the shaft, you're not actually measuring deflection, you're measuring the distance it's turned around the shaft. Okay, hopefully that's clear. But you say this isn't a video about how to use them. There are loads of those online. I can do one if people want. This is just how simple these things are to make if you've got this table and you follow the same numbers. So these are brilliant. I'll send a link to these, and then just it's a £2 weight, which gives you this spine deflection table. But I'll put it on the website. Hopefully that's helpful. I'll do another video now of me spining some arrows so you can get a sense of how accurate it is.